It is truly a pleasure for me to be here before you today. My name is Tom WARDLE, and I am here for two reasons. One is because I am an educator who has been teaching people about brains, how brains work, and how to work with brains for over a decade. The other reason is because I'm also a Zen teacher who's been training in meditation for over 25 years. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about meditation from both of these perspectives. And I'm going to be as clear as I can about which perspective I'm speaking from at any given time. And if you're ever confused or want to know what my opinion would be from the other side, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm going to begin the presentation mostly speaking from the scientific perspective, a more objective perspective as an educator, talking about the brain, giving us some basic vocabulary about how the brain works, and then understanding exactly what meditation does to the brain. Then I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to speak a little more from my experience of Zen training and meditation practice in that particular tradition, okay? So let's just get right down to it off the bat. The TLDR of this presentation is you need to meditate for the exact same reasons you need to exercise, okay? That's it in a nutshell. That's what this whole thing is about. At this point, we understand that exercise is absolutely critical to maintaining the health of the human body. And in fact, if you look at the recommendations, it's not that simple. It's actually two things that they tell you. They want you to do cardiovascular exercise to maintain the health of your heart, and they also want you to do some kind of resistance training. And what that does is that maintains the health of your movement system, your skeletal muscles, your bones, your joints, so that your body can continue to function in these two critical ways throughout your lifespan. And we all know what happens if you neglect either one. What meditation does for the brain is essentially the exact same thing. It is a way of engaging your mind that brings about very, very similar benefits for the health of the brain as an organ, but actually in ways that cascade across the entire body system. So not only can a regular meditation practice help you to feel better emotionally and to deal with negative emotion, but it will actually literally make you healthier. So that's the whole business in a nutshell. And if you need to drop off now, you got the most important parts. But we're going to go a little deeper right now. And where we're going to start is we're going to look at some brain basics so that we have a common vocabulary to understand exactly what it is that happens when you meditate. And by the way, what's going on most of the rest of the time. So meet your brain. Actually, this is what your brain is mostly made up of. This is a neuron, which is the most important cell type in the brain. Your brain is composed of roughly 100 billion of these little cells, okay? And they vary enormously in size. Some of them are teeny tiny, just a couple of microns long. The longest one in your body actually runs from your spinal cord, the base of your spine, all the way down to your foot. That would be your sciatic nerve. In my case, it's about 1 meter long, but measure your own leg, okay? So neurons vary wildly, but regardless of their appearance, they all do exactly the same thing. And that is they carry an electrical signal from one end of the cell to the other end of the cell. And the really interesting thing about neurons is not so much the cells themselves, but their connections, which is what this image suggests. Every single neuron in your brain has roughly 10,000 incoming connections from other cells and roughly 10,000 outgoing connections to other cells. So if you do the math on that, the number that you come up with is that there are roughly 2 quadrillion connections between neurons in your brain right now. What that means is that there are more connections in your brain than there are stars in the entire Milky Way galaxy. Okay, that's a nice headline. It's kind of poetic, but what should we actually take away from that? Well, the main thing that we should take away from it is that brains are incredibly complex and totally unique, because how those connections form, where they form, the circuits that develop around them are entirely individualized, and hence the beautiful diversity of all the human beings you've ever met in your life. Now, we need a way to try and break down some of that complexity. And what I'm not going to do is stand in front of a blank image, an unlabeled image of a human brain, and tell you about all of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different parts and regions. That's just too much, okay? What will work for us, however, is a way of grouping it into 3 parts. This is a model called the triune brain model. And there are definitely some issues with it. And if you're interested and you want to talk about those, believe me, you and I could go on at great length, maybe in the Q&A or afterwards. But for our purposes, and for the purposes of most people who aren't neuroendocrinologists or brain surgeons, this model will do just fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to break the brain down into 3 primary parts. But before we do that, I want everybody to raise a hand. Fold your thumb across the middle of your palm, and then wrap your fingers around it, okay? You look at it from the side, you've got a perfect model of the brain right there in your hand, the hand brain, okay? And I'm sure you can see the resemblance between what you see on your hand and what you see on the screen. So the first region that we're going to talk about is what I like to call the deep brain. So these would be the structures really at the base of your thumb and the heel of your hand into your wrist. That's going to be, let's see if I can make Zoom cooperate here. So that's going to be stuff in this general area, okay, towards the base of the skull. Some people like to call this the reptilian brain because that's about as much brain as reptiles have. I think that sounds a little too much like something off of the cover of a tabloid. And I also think it's a little misleading. So we're going to stick with deep brain. But here is ground central for your nervous system. This is where all critical systems are managed from. So the reason your heart keeps beating is because of a cell in this part of the brain. The reason you keep breathing, even when you're unconscious, is because of this part of your brain. But it gets more interesting than that. You remember that whole puberty thing that happened back in your teens? You can thank this part of the brain for setting that off. So this part of the brain is importantly involved in regulating hormone production throughout the human body. This is the part of the brain that is also responsible for regulating states of arousal. So if you are sexually excited, if you are feeling aggressive, if you are feeling afraid, this part of the brain is centrally involved in that, okay? If you are feeling hungry, this is the part of the brain that won't let you stop thinking about it, okay? And when we look at it, what all of these things have in common is that these are the most essential functions for life to continue. And so they happen here in this oldest part, deepest part of the brain. The next part of the brain that we're going to talk about is called the limbic system. And we're just going to go one layer up. So now what you'd be looking at is actually the thumb itself, if you go back to your hand brain, okay? So right in the dead center of the brain, we're talking this area, okay? And the limbic system adds a really interesting layer of functionality. You get 2 new features with a limbic system. You get memory and emotion. And taken together, you get the ability to learn. So basically what the structures in the limbic system do is they take snapshots of your life anytime something important happens. And you can pretty well gauge how important something is by how strong your reaction to it is. The stronger your reaction to a stimulus, the more impression it makes in our memories. All of us have experienced this. What the limbic system does is it takes that snapshot and it attaches a primal emotion to that snapshot. So we're talking about things like anger or rage, fear, disgust, happiness, okay? These primal emotions. And any time in the future that something that looks a little bit like that snapshot, anything that happens that reminds you of that snapshot, you will have an echo of that same emotion. It will push your brain towards the same state that it was in at the time that that thing happened. This system gone haywire is actually what post-traumatic stress disorder is. In PTSD, something so traumatic happens that you lose your ability to remind yourself that, that's a memory. That terrible thing is not actually happening to me again right now. The amazing thing is that your brain doesn't much care, because to your brain, vividly imagining something, whether it's a fantasy or a memory, is about 95% the same as experiencing it in real life. How do we know? Because we can measure the chemicals. We can measure the chemical response of the brain. We can measure the electrical response of the brain. And we see that if you vividly imagine something, it's nearly the same as actually living through it, okay? So we can see that the limbic system is potentially a powerful tool and also potentially a major obstacle if it gets triggered in the wrong ways at the wrong time. And I'm sure that most of you are sitting there thinking back in your own life, wondering about, okay, what are the memories and what are my triggers? That's awesome. Okay, that's exactly the sort of way I want you thinking. Now, on to the last part of the brain. It's all that wrinkly stuff on the outside. So if we go back to the hand brain, we'd be looking at your fingers and the back of your hand, okay? This is a region of the brain called the neocortex, or literally the new layer, okay? And it is the most recent part of the brains to evolve, and it is most developed in mammals. And amongst mammals, aside from the curious case of dolphins, who have just utterly bizarre brains, really unique creatures, you see the most development in this region in primates. Humans are primates. Humans are the arch primate, okay? So what do you get from this wrinkly mass on the outside of the brain? Well, you get your ability to process language, your ability to process numbers, your ability to navigate space, your ability to control your body, and your ability to process sensations from your body. Let me just take a moment and step out of the talk for a second and completely blow your minds. Sensation does not happen in your body, it happens in your brain, okay? So if I sever the nerve that transmits pain from my big finger to my brain, doesn't matter what I do to that finger, I'm not going to feel it at all, right? That has huge implications for what we're going to go on to talk about later, but just think about that for a second. That signal has to get from the body to the brain, and the brain has to process it before anything becomes real. Okay, so we've got our three-layered system. Here is the big engineering defect. All of these systems function off one power supply, and they actually compete for it. This is, if you ask me, this is the #1 design flaw of the brain. There is one supply of blood to the brain. That's what gives you the power. It's oxygen and glucose, sugar. That's it. That's basically what the brain needs, okay? By the way, the brain consumes more sugar than any other part of your body by a huge margin, huge margin. The brain is incredibly resource intensive. These three parts of the brain function differently, okay? The deep brain functions on the level of primitive survival, Okay, this is your fight, flight, freeze kind of thinking. This is your everything is a matter of life and death kind of thinking. That's how that brain functions. That's what it's there to do. It's there to keep us alive. We add a layer with the limbic system. Now we can remember things. We have primitive learning. What we don't have is analytical thought. We don't have problem solving yet. We don't have thinking about cause and effect. We don't have thinking about future consequences. All of that comes from this outermost layer of the brain. And specifically, those higher order functions come from this area at the front. It would be your front knuckles, directly above your eyeballs. This is a region called the prefrontal cortex. And that's where all the really juicy stuff happens from the point of view of neuroscience. If you like, you can think of it almost like an active workbench. Whatever you are thinking about or working on consciously right now, that's happening in your prefrontal cortex. And the reason that it can happen there is because that region of the brain is connected to almost every other part of the brain, which lets it do two things, two very important things. The first is it can bring in information from any other part of the brain. So working with this kind of conscious thought, you can do that kind of logical reasoning, problem solving, anticipating cause and effect, right? All that stuff that can make you a really good human and good at life, right? But the prefrontal cortex also has connections that send signals back to almost every part of the brain. And that means that it uniquely has the ability, is my clicker cooperating? No, it isn't, darn it. It uniquely has the ability. Why is this? Oh, okay, sorry, tech. There we go. And the lines are still there. I'm sorry, I don't know how to get rid of them. The prefrontal cortex uniquely has the ability to modulate the volume of other parts of the brain. And that's one way to think about what goes on inside your head, is you have all of these different brain systems functioning simultaneously, each of them trying to tell you something, each of them advocating for a particular behavior, response, course of action. And you have to deal with all of that noise. It's not actually just one simple volume knob. In reality, it's the biggest, most sophisticated mixing board you've ever seen, right? And this is one of the key ways that meditation can be useful to us in terms of modulating all of these different noises from different parts of our brain that we deal with constantly. Stelly, you got a question?
Yes. Will you give us exactly what you said again when you said the prefrontal cortex controls the volume, then you mentioned something about other different parts of the brain. You put it like that there was one sentence you said that really laid the stage for everything that just came after it. Can you repeat that phrase, Tom?
Sentence about it being like a workbench. Is that what you're looking for? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. You said that the prefrontal cortex was what is like the volume controller for all the other parts of the brain, or something to that effect.
So basically, the way to think about it is whatever you're thinking about consciously, whatever you're consciously aware of right now, that's stuff going on in the prefrontal cortex. But those are pieces that will have been drawn from across the brain. The prefrontal cortex has other connections to those same brain regions that allows it to either turn up the volume if it's important, that's what paying attention is, or turn down the volume if it's not important. That's not scratching the mosquito bite, right? And let me just go back to the thing about focus right now. Here's the funny thing. I'm sure we've all heard of attention deficit disorder. Okay, it's when for biochemical reasons you have difficulty sustaining a normal level of attention. Well, there are a lot of conversations we can have about this, but the point I want to make is this right now. Most people who have ADD are fidgeters. They engage in active behavior, right? You can see them doing stuff. That's part of how you know they're not entirely paying attention, or at least you think they're not. The kinds of drugs we use to treat ADD are all stimulants. You'd think that somebody who's having attention problems needs to like calm down and focus in. That does not work at all, like at all. All of the drugs that actually work for treating ADD are stimulants. You actually need to turn the volume up in the brain, okay? And days of conversation on that subject in all sorts of different ways. Let me bring it back to the mixing board, okay? So on a good day, if you're paying attention and if you try, you actually have quite a bit of control over this mixing board. You can decide to ignore certain things. You can decide not to worry about whether you're going to get that job offer or what your boss thinks of the latest project or what that person you took out last weekend thought about you, or that really stupid joke that just fell completely flat in front of the entire class and nobody even cracked a smile, right? On a good day, you can choose not to think about that stuff by thinking about something else, right? See, that's one of the other quirks about the brain is, let's do this right now. Don't think of a pink elephant. What are you thinking about? Exactly, okay? So when you have kids, keep this in mind. The brain does not do negatives, okay? If Johnny keeps hitting his sister, don't say, Johnny, don't hit your sister. Say, Johnny, keep your hands to yourself, thank you, okay? Major strategy for dealing with young children, okay? Works surprisingly well with adults too. Brain doesn't work in negatives, it only works in positives, okay? So if you say, don't think of something, you're gonna think of it. You need to give yourself something else to think about. Well, you can see how that might connect to meditation as well. We'll get there, okay? So there's one other piece that we need to talk about right now, because that's what happens on a good day. That is what happens on a day when you are conscious, you are paying attention, you are aware, you are making choices about what you will and what you will not think about. That is not every day. In fact, that is not every moment of every day. Inevitably, we have these moments where we just let our minds drift. We're just killing time, or we're not thinking about anything in particular, or we're tired that day. Sleep has profound effects on cognition, your ability to think. Just 1 hour of sleep can make a shocking difference in cognitive performance. Maybe you haven't eaten yet today. Another thing that makes a shocking difference in brain performance, okay? Maybe you're just having an off kind of day. It doesn't matter. Maybe you're having a perfectly normal day, but you have one of those moments. And all of a sudden, you're not directing your attention anymore. You leave the soundboard. And here's the problem with the brain is, if you walk away from a real soundboard, none of those dials are moving. You walk away from your brain, every single one of them is going to adjust itself. Every single one. So what happens in a brain when there's nobody intentionally directing it is what we call the default mode network. And the default mode network is a really important thing for us to understand, because we've done a lot of research on this, and it basically seems to be a combination of life experience and genetics that determines the exact details. But this is what your brain does when it's on idle. And it's almost perfectly analogous to idling a combustion engine, okay? You're just leaving it to rev, okay? Your brain will engage in certain patterns of thought. Almost inevitably, those patterns of thought tend towards negative cognition. We think about our mistakes. We think about things that we wish went differently in our lives, things that we wish we had done but hadn't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Exactly what it looks like is different for every individual. But for almost all human beings, when you get into the default mode network, you begin to spiral down into a pattern of negative thought. And this has been researched extensively. And there is a profoundly powerful correlation between being in the default mode network and negative cognition, bad feelings, depression, anxiety. You see, it's an extremely powerful correlation. So all of this kind of gives us some basics about how the brain works, a little bit about how you can use it, and some important cautions about what happens if you don't consciously direct it. So, in that case, what is meditation? Well, that's actually pretty easy. Meditation is a grounded inward awareness of body and mind in the present moment. Okay? You can quote me on that one. Meditation is a grounded inward awareness of body and mind in the present moment. Okay? It is the antidote to the default mode network. In the default mode network, you get dragged along with your brain wherever it goes. In meditation, you constantly, as much as necessary, you tell your brain, no, come back here. We're here. No, come back here. We're here. Okay? That is the bare bone basics of meditation. So when we look at what meditation practices are, they vary wildly. Okay? There are meditation traditions in essentially every major religion on earth. There is also entirely secular meditation. There is even medically developed meditation techniques for dealing with depression, anxiety, pain management, addictions, eating disorders, okay? There are all sorts of different flavors of meditation. That's great news, because I guarantee you somewhere out there, there is somebody just waiting to teach you a form that will work beautifully for you. What we're going to talk about tonight is about as universal a form as I can make it, okay? So what are the common elements in meditation? All meditation practices have some kind of an anchor. You have to be doing something to bring yourself back to this present moment, okay? There's a reason we call it a practice. It is a meditation practice. It is an active thing. If in doubt, go with the breath, okay? And there are a variety of reasons for that, but the breath is the bridge between psychology and physiology, okay? The breath is the bridge between body and mind. If you want to control one, you manipulate the other. Don't do this, but if you started to hyperventilate right now, within 3 minutes, you'd have a panic attack. Just by hyperventilating, breathing short and shallow and fast. How effective are breathing techniques at controlling the mind? Guys, there is literally an official Navy SEAL breathing technique, okay? It is such a powerful correlation that the baddest, most heavily trained special operators on the planet have their own official breathing technique that every single recruit learns so that they can manage stress while on combat operations, okay? And if you want to learn it, it's called box breathing. It's super easy. It's really useful. That's another thing. We can have that conversation too, okay? What we're talking about here is meditation. So step one is you need an anchor practice. Start with your breath. Almost everybody does. Step two, you're going to notice that things happen, okay? You will get distracted. You will start to itch. You will get uncomfortable in your seat. You will worry about whether or not you left the oven on, or what you're going to eat for dinner, or when this stupid thing is going to be over, okay? The mind will continue to do what it does, and that is to produce thoughts. And eventually one of those thoughts is going to entice you away from that awareness of your breath and just this moment. That is not a mistake. That's what you came to practice. And so what do? You recognize that you've been occupied by a thought, you acknowledge it, and you release it. And you come back to your anchor practice, whatever that may be. That, in a nutshell, is meditation. Now, what it does to the brain is absolutely extraordinary. When you first start meditating, within just a couple of seconds, you'll begin to activate a part of the prefrontal cortex called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Whatever, fancy words, who cares? This is a part of the brain that is powerfully associated with self-reflection and self-awareness. So what does that mean? It means you're paying attention to what's going on here, inside yourself. After a few minutes, we see the lateral prefrontal cortex kicks in. And this does something really interesting. It takes you out of yourself. It takes you out of your subjective experience. So instead of being trapped in the me of it all, it's almost like you're suddenly the narrator or the observer in your own life. And what does that do? It brings in more objectivity. It makes you more rational in your understanding of things. Then, with practice, eventually you start to activate the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. And that is a brain region that is powerfully associated with empathy. And so with practice, we see amazing things happen. We see humans become more self-aware. They become less judgmental and more rational. They take things less personally. And they just kind of roll with the punches in life. And people become genuinely kinder. There's a heart opening that is possible through meditation. A raising of compassion that is profoundly important. So, that's what happens in the brain when you meditate. What are the effects? What are the cumulative effects? Okay, and by the way, look, this is true of anything and everything that has to do with humans. Consistency is the #1 key. And I'm going to come back to this again, but consistency is absolutely key. Meditation can do radical, transformative, powerful things. I have seen it, I have lived it. You have to be consistent. It doesn't take very much, okay? 5 minutes a day, every day is plenty, my friends. That is plenty, okay? Plenty. And if you can bump that up, I think you'll find it naturally grows in time. If you get that consistent meditation practice going, the first thing that's going to happen is it decreases cortisol levels throughout the entire body. Cortisol is the primary stress hormone in humans. And so you might be sitting there thinking, oh, all right, you feel less stressed, no big deal. Not so, my friend. This is a lot more than just your subjective experience of stress. Cortisol is a hormone that affects every single organ and system in your body. Elevated cortisol levels are extremely damaging to the entire human body. They lead to all sorts of problems, particularly problems in cognition, heart problems, and even can increase rates of cancer. If you want to get into this, Frontline did a great documentary a number of years ago called Stress, the Silent Killer. It features my favorite living scientist, Robert Sapolsky, who is a neuroendocrinologist down at Stanford, and he will lay out exactly just how serious cortisol is in the human body. And he'll even talk about the British NHS administrative service while he does it. It's pretty amazing, some of the research there. So what happens if you meditate consistently? We can literally measure a decrease in the level of this chemical in your entire body. At the same time, we're going to measure increases of serotonin, DHEA, GABA, endorphins, growth hormone, and melatonin. Oh my God, that sounds super impressive. What do those all mean? So serotonin is one of the most important neurotransmitters, and it is central to feelings of contentment, satisfaction, and well-being. It is so important that the first line of drugs used to treat depressive disorders are called SSRIs, that's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Basically what they do is they make more serotonin available in your brain. And they work, sometimes. Interestingly, the efficacy of SSRIs in treating depression is exactly the same as the efficacy of regular meditation. There's research that shows it to be exactly the same. Interesting stuff. DHEA is a hormone that is also associated with feelings of balance and well-being. GABA is a very, very important neurotransmitter that is also associated with feelings of well-being, but GABA kind of works on the opposite side of it. GABA is intimately involved in your internal strength and your resilience. Okay, if you're looking to build resilience, the neurotransmitter that you're trading on is GABA. Okay, endorphins, those are the happy chemicals. Meditation literally raises the levels of the neurotransmitters that make you feel happiness in your body, okay? It also increases growth hormone. Growth hormone is another one of those that affects the entire body system. You want to think about it as an optimizer. It basically makes everything run at a slightly higher, more effective level. And we're talking about marginal changes. They're enough to be significant. They're not enough to be, you may have heard of growth hormone as a performance enhancing drug. That's vastly greater amounts of it, okay? And then lastly, melatonin. Melatonin is the sleep hormone, okay? So one of the other things that you can get out of regular meditation practice is actually an improvement in your quality of sleep, which in and of itself has systemic health benefits. It actually doubles down on all of those as well as quite a few others. What else does meditation do? It thickens the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, okay? The hippocampus is a structure in the brain involved in memory, and the prefrontal cortex is this guy right up here that we've been talking about the entire time. That thickening means that they're stronger. They work better and more reliably in doing what they do. And the main thing that they do is they turn those volume knobs in other regions of your brain, okay? Regular meditation also shrinks your amygdala. The amygdala is a very, very important structure, kind of the queen of the limbic system, if you like. And that is the structure where we see the closest correlation between fear and aggression responses. Okay, so this is what drives that very, very primitive memory system that we all are living with. When you shrink it, obviously it's going to have less impact on brain function. It's going to mean that those fear-driven voices that you sometimes hear in your head literally get quieter. You hear them less often. Meditation also preserves gray matter. When we talk about the brain, you'll often hear people talk about white matter versus gray matter. Gray matter is the neurons themselves, the actual cells. White matter is a layer of fat that develops around neurons that are regularly activated, and it's a good kind of fat that makes them more efficient, okay? So when we say that regular meditation preserves gray matter, what we're actually saying is it prevents cell death in the brain. Obviously, that's a good thing, okay? And then lastly, you can actually rewire your brain. You can literally change your brain through regular meditation practice. And guys, this is not the work of years and years and years. It'll keep getting better for years and years and years. It'll continue to improve, but we can see measurable changes in as little as 8 weeks of daily practice at meditation. 2 months, that's it, okay? All right, so let's talk about actually how to do it. Well, most meditation is done sitting, and here's your obligatory sunset by the beach, somebody sitting in a pretzel leg pose picture. There had to be at least one, right? Okay, well, sure, you might sit like that, but why not like this? Okay, why not like these people? We often fetishize the whole thing about meditation. We turn it into something special. You've got to have all of these special tools, and you've got to sit a special way, and you've got to do all this weird stuff. None of that is true. Meditation is literally the simplest thing you can do as a human being, and it is your birthright. It is being here now. This is your life. It belongs to you. Every single second belongs to you. Meditation is being here each moment as it comes to you. So let's get off the slides, okay? Because what we're actually going to do is we're going to do a little bit of meditation together right now, okay? So what I want you to do is first, before we do anything, I just want you to take a minute and check in with yourself. Imagine you just walked in through the door at the end of the day. Your partner, your dog, your cat, whatever. Hey, how was your day? That's what we're doing. How do you feel? Just notice. What's on your mind? How's your body doing? Anything pulling at you? Anything weighing on you? Anything you're excited about? Just notice. Okay. So now we're going to meditate. And the first thing that you have to do when you meditate is you have to take care of the body, because the body takes care of us. Okay? So it doesn't actually matter the posture you choose, but it should be something reasonably comfortable and something that you can maintain without moving. Okay? I've known people who, for medical reasons, had to meditate lying flat. That's fine. The only disadvantage to that is that it's a little easier to fall asleep than if you're sitting up. That's the only disadvantage, okay? Doesn't matter how you sit. So in whatever chair you're in now, I want you to adjust yourself. Here's the important piece. You need to align your spine, okay? So the ideal way to do that is your hip axis should be slightly above your knees. When your hip axis is below your knees, what it does is it forces an unnatural curvature into the base of your spine. That's very, very uncomfortable, okay, and can actually lead to back trouble over time. So however you're sitting, maybe you need to scoot to the edge of your chair. Maybe you just need to scoot up to the back of it, whatever you need to do, okay? But you want to find a good natural alignment, all right? Plant your feet firmly, flatly on the ground, and just take a moment to feel that connection to the earth, okay? Come up your legs, just sort of checking for comfort. Do you need to make any adjustments? Okay, totally fine to wiggle into it, right? To find your way. The body will naturally settle. Whenever I sit down in a zendo to meditate, you'll see me doing this. Okay, so the body finds its natural alignment. All right. Hands. You can do whatever you want with your hands. Okay. You'll often see people doing something like this. I don't even know where this comes from. Who knows? In Zen, we do this. Okay. There's nothing wrong in the world with just laying your hands on your thighs. Okay. That's perfect. All right. So the next thing I want you to do is I want you to become aware of your breath. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do the most basic kind of meditation that I think there is. And you're going to pay attention to your breath. You're going to count. Inhale 1, exhale 1, inhale 2, exhale 2. We're going to do this in a cycle up to 10. And if you make it to 10, go back to 1. Now, the reason I say if is because the mind does not stop. Thoughts keep coming, okay? That's what the brain does. It secretes thoughts, all right? Don't take it too seriously. What I want you to do is I want you to try to treat those thoughts almost like clouds passing in the sky. Notice the thought. You can even acknowledge, give it a wave. Don't get distracted by the thought. And whatever you do, don't jump on the thought and let it start driving you somewhere. That thought is drunk and you're not safe, okay? One of my favorite Rumi quotes of all time, sit, be still, and listen, because you're drunk and we're on the edge of a roof. Love that quote. Absolutely love that quote, okay? So you're gonna notice your thoughts as they appear. Just watch them go by, okay? And you'll notice sometimes, okay, releasing the thought, coming back to my breath. Same thought. It can happen again and again. And it's very easy for this to feel like you're failing, like that's a mistake. Like in meditation, you're supposed to have this single pointed focus and think no thoughts or think only one thought. Guys, bullshit. That's just not how it works, okay? That's just not how it works. And that's not a mistake when you start thinking. Actually, that's what you came to practice. Recognizing, oh, I'm getting caught up in thought, setting the thought aside, coming back to reality, coming back to this moment, right here, this breath, this body, right? This is what's real, right here. That's the muscle we're exercising when we meditate. So it's not a mistake when you get distracted by a thought. That opportunity to release it and to come back, that is exactly the work you came to do, okay? So we're gonna do this for 2 whole minutes, and it's gonna get awkward because 2 minutes is a really long time when you're sitting in total silence, okay? But we're still gonna do it, all right? And just notice whatever happens for you, right? But what's your anchor? Counting my breath. Coming back, counting my breath. If you get distracted, that's fine. Come back, start over at 1, keep going. Sometimes you might find yourself at 15. Shit, back to 1. Okay, right? Doesn't matter, whatever it is. We're just gonna keep counting the breath, okay? We'll do this for 2 minutes. You're going to hear 1 bell at the beginning, and then you'll hear another bell at the end. Let's see, how do I get out of here? There we go. And then you'll hear another bell at the end, okay? Any questions before we begin? Should I close my eyes? That's a great question. Should you close your eyes? There's an enormous amount of disagreement about that. It doesn't matter. Here's the thing. The more open your eyes are, the more data is going to be going through your eyes into your brain. That's more distraction. That's more stuff you have to shut out, right? On the other hand, if your eyes are completely closed, we're getting into that easy to fall asleep territory again, right? So in Zen, we actually split the difference, all right? We leave our eyes just a crack open. You can't actually see anything, but there's enough light in the room that you don't nod off, at least not usually. Okay, do whatever works for you, okay? No, again, there's not a wrong way to do it. It's just trade-offs, okay? Good question. Any others? Marvelous. Let's meditate, guys. Here we go. Okay. So now check in with yourself again. What do you notice now compared to before we did that? Make some notes to yourself. And if anybody would like to share, please do so.
I don't mind sharing, Tom. One thing I noticed about myself was how tight my diaphragm felt the first few inhales, almost kind of like when you haven't worked a muscle in a while and it's kind of weak almost. It like the more air you want to draw inside, you kind of feel your diaphragm. Well, for me, since I haven't meditated in months, which is why I'm here. But anyway, you feel your diaphragm literally shaking. Like, hey, maybe you should work me out more often, dude. Your breathing's too shallow, right?
Fantastic. And you're touching on something really important that you'll notice is that your breathing evolves. Sometimes when people give meditation instruction, they'll put a lot of emphasis on this. They'll try to get you doing that deep diaphragm breathing. I don't actually do that anymore because your body breathed that way originally. You look at an infant, that's how an infant breathes. Through social learning, we start to breathe into our chests over the course of our life, right? But that's your birthright, is that kind of deep breathing, and it affects the body differently. You oxygenate the blood more, it has systemic effects throughout the entire body-mind system. And so one of the things that happens when you meditate is that you rediscover that natural state of breathing. You find that natural rhythm for yourself. And it's interesting, you commented on this, Stelly, the tension that we feel within our bodies, but particularly in our torsos, particularly in the area of our guts and our chest, tends to be very, very reflective of our emotional states as well. So tension, I mean, think about it, right? This is a very common thing we talk about, right? Very often we talk about people, oh, you're nervous, you've got butterflies in your stomach, right? That's the English metaphor for talking about that physical experience of stress, right? Great example. Anybody else would like to share anything? And no pressure, guys. It is very, very personal. It's a very intimate thing. So that's meditation in a nutshell. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know what's your suggestion because I meditate time ago, but I leave and now I start to meditate again, and I feel too much fear, fear because I close my eyes usually because open eyes I can't. But I feel fear.
Yeah.
It's like someone else is attack me or someone. What's your suggestion? What can I do for control this?
So there are a lot of things that you can do. And actually what you're touching on is very important because meditation is not always a comfortable thing. Meditation, when we engage in meditation, we are turning our eyes within ourselves. And that means that we will inevitably end up engaging with everything that's in here. And not everything in here is pleasant. There's fear in here, right? There are all kinds of negative emotions that can come up when you meditate. And in time, what happens is you learn to be with them and they lose their power, right? So for me, it's, with some of my baggage, it's kind of like, oh, my old friend, the one that I don't really like all that much, but he just won't stop coming by the house. All right, fine, get a beer from the fridge and don't bother me, right? It's there, I still see it, right? I might even hear it from time to time, but it can't come in and wreck everything. You see what I mean? So that's something that happens gradually over time. And you're also touching on something else that's very important. Because one of the things that I'm going to do closing here is really strongly encourage every single one of you to start your own meditation practice. But you need a mentor, okay? You absolutely need a mentor, okay? because of what can come up, because this is difficult, because it is complex, because it is a life path, because all of the possibility of humanity is in you. And you are going to encounter all of that through meditation practice. Some of it is glorious, some of it is beautiful, some of it will set your heart to song. And other parts of it are really, really painful, right? Some of the hardest moments of my life have happened during meditation, okay? So you need a mentor. You need somebody you can trust, who can guide you, give you advice, and support you as different stuff comes up. Again, it's a practice, right? It's just like, you'd be crazy if you'd never done any sports, any kind of athletics. The worst thing you could do is buy a gym membership and just start going to the gym. You would inevitably injure yourself. You need a coach, you need a trainer to orient you and to get you started. And then what happens? Well, you learn some basics, you go off and do them, you improve, and then you come back. You say, hey, I've got this down, but I'd still, I want to learn this now, or where do I go next? That's the mentor's role, okay? In terms of the specifics that you're dealing with, actually, I'd be happy to talk to you privately afterwards, but I don't want to drag you into the spotlight here because, again, I want to respect everybody's privacy with what comes up during meditation, okay? But I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. So I know that we're getting to about 6 o'clock here, so I'll just briefly acknowledge my personal experience of meditation, then we can do some Q&A for anybody who wants to stick around. So I got into meditation in my early teens. Basically, I was raised in a very Christian, very religious household. But for me, I always knew that religion had to be a verb. You had to do something. When I went and I needed something to do in my spiritual life. And I just didn't understand what I was supposed to do as a Christian. It didn't make sense to me. And so I started looking around, and by total coincidence, there was a Zen Buddhist monastery about 15 miles from the farm I grew up on. And guys, it's the most crazy coincidence in the world because I'm talking about rural New England, back on the East Coast. I mean, it's literally the middle of nowhere. I couldn't believe it. And I went for a meditation class, and I had my first experience of sitting meditation, and I remember it vividly. And I remember the monastery's bell started to ring while we were meditating. And there was this long period of time before I was like, oh, there's a bell ringing.